We continue our work at Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, and we are now going to discuss the investigation, the outcomes of the investigation of the liquidation of the Isolation Foundation in Donetsk. We invited the representatives of the military prosecutor's office, but they did not appear. Therefore, we continue without them. Good afternoon. If I may, I will continue to speak Russian. My name is Liubov Mykhailova, and I am a founder of the foundation IZOLYATSIA, or isolation. This fund was commenced, so to say, at an enterprise that produced insulation and isolation, as we call them here, materials for electric equipment, and our foundation became an important center for the development of local cultural heritage, including the communities, local Greek communities, Russian, Ukrainian, and other national communities. In that area, we were discussing the use of language, of certain verbiage, as a means of violence, and there was the work of that foundation continued until the very events of 2014. We even had a visit from Mr. Khodorkovsky, who was indicted on corruption charges in the Russian Federation. So we were perceived as, in the end, as an ideological, some new ideological center, this Izolyatsia fund was upon the decision of maybe local authorities, was taken by the local militias. So we felt ourselves, as Lenin used to say, one of the heights, commanding heights of that region. So we had to move, all our team had to move into Kiev from Donetsk. We had practically to run away without taking any luggage with us. We just moved to Kiev. So we have been here in Kiev for the last 3 years. We have been working in Kiev for the last, we can say it's our 4th year here, and we also worked for 4 years in Donetsk. So we are now trying to look back and understand what's our stance, what should we do, what's our legacy. So we are a part of a story, the second part of which is that we are trying to gather the evidence of what happened to our fund. We now know that our premises in Donetsk were taken by the Ministry of Public Security. We publish all this information in the internet, and we are interviewing people who were imprisoned there, and we are gathering, we are collating this information. We informed a number of authorities, and we also included our partners, among whom is the law firm Golovan and Partners. Maybe Ihor Golovan, who is one of the leading partners of this Golovan and Partners law firm, will inform you more in detail. Yes, we have this fund among our clients. And let me start by saying that we started fighting against the Donetsk People's Republic long before the events of 2014. Let me remind you that they initially existed as a public organization, so we started fighting them before we had started them before the events of 2014. And it was that organization of Donetsk People's Republic. They started with some manifestations, even some actions like they tried to break the gates into, probably he meant the premises of that foundation. We then informed and solicited Ukrainian law enforcers, asking them to suppress the activities of the Donetsk People's Republic organization. But and after that organization turned into a self-proclaimed republic that we consider to be, whom we consider to be bandits, they practically confiscated the premises of the fund Isolation, and it was practically confiscation. It was done by a number of armed people. We thought that their purpose was also to frighten us, and they were against that fund because they probably were against the European values that that fund contained. When the premises of Isolation were taken by that militia, there were a number of prospects, booklets about about art, and it was indeed modern art, and I think that they probably hated that modern art, and they wanted to destroy it. So this expropriation of the premises of Isolation, it was a terrorist act in our view, and it was a pro-Russian organization that did it. Let us show you a brief 2 minutes video. Isolation is a cultural initiatives organization. My father was for 50 years the director of that plant during Soviet period, and we had scores of followers. We have earlier today there was a group of people who entered the premises. They had some firearms with them, and that's how it happened. The text says that it's an interview of Arhan Jamil something. He's saying that his unit is located inside the former factory of insulation materials. The new owners of which claimed that they were the so to say, the center of modern art. Here you can see what kind of art they were exposing, the expositions of art exhibits that they had there. So I think it should be these things that promote, you know, drugs and similar things. They should not be, you know, authorized here, and on the contrary, they should be punished. I suggest we continue, because as you saw, there was a number of you know, pieces of evidence of what happened in our art center, and so let Mr. Golovan tell us about the ordeal that we sustained after that. It's what you saw, the video you saw is only a brief video, and we have these videos to document the impressions and the comments of the militiamen themselves. So when we solicited the Ukrainian authorities, even before 2014, to suppress those NGOs that were not pro-Ukrainian, the Ukrainian authorities initiated criminal proceedings against them, and it was not easy for us to initiate those, to make them initiate those criminal proceedings. And what we did later on was that after the premises of the isolation center were confiscated, we managed to gather enough materials to make the owners of the former factory of insulation materials a party that sustained damages. So we helped them to claim these damages from the authorities, and now we know that there was a detention center. Some parts of those buildings of the factory were turned into detention center because there was a cashier's office with that was equipped with you know, security locks and railings, and so they had the ammunitions there, stored the ammunitions there, and also probably the members of pro-Ukrainian forces that confronted the local militias, and they were detained. And so these people who were detained there, they were the witnesses of, for example, the various providing various evidence of, for example, the vehicles entering and exiting the territory of the factory. You know, and we suspect that some of those vehicles might have been stolen. So we have done a lot of work, and we have drawn the attention of the investigating authorities to these all these facts. We supplied the authorities with all the evidence that needed, and there were a number of law enforcement agencies involved in, you know, persecuting those who expropriated this property, and that's there was a situation, a paradoxical situation, when with all that evidence, law enforcement authorities gave, you know, responded us with a document signed by the prosecutor's office, military prosecutor's office, saying in that document, it is dated November the 11th of 2017, so it was earlier this year, a month ago, slightly more than a month ago. So in their reply, they said that they were checking upon the information with regard to the people whom we mentioned, or from whom we interviewed, and whose interviews we forwarded to the law enforcement agencies. In the reply, it is said that as soon as the exact, you know, culpability, items of culpability is registered, is identified, they will be duly prosecuted. So when there are when there is a lot of evidence against those criminals, although we should not call them criminals before there is a ruling of a court, but when we you know, supply all this information, all this evidence, and the prosecutor's office gives us a reply where they say that the exact, you know, violations and breaches of law on the part of the persons mentioned are established, then there would be a prosecution, due prosecution against them. Still, the paradox is that with all the evidence that we supplied, they still cannot establish you know, their culpability, and they cannot charge them. So it's after 3 years. How can we explain the fact that after 3 years, 3 years after we gave them all that information, they cannot find any, you know, any exact evidence, and cannot establish, you know, the guilt of those persons. Yeah, I would like to emphasize it again that after all the evidence and the fact of the expropriation of our property that we consider to be a terrorist act, the authorities still cannot prosecute those in charge. And when I look at the law enforcement agencies work on them arresting some people who give, you know, some telephones to the people who later turn out to be the members of the organizations that are considered terrorist organizations by Ukrainian authorities. I think it's all this is insufficient, and Ukrainian authorities in many cases cannot identify the real guilt of the people whom we consider guilty. And in my view, you know, the public authorities being, you know, at a level, at a very low level, they try to put a brake on all the processes regarding the Donbass area. Mr. Golovan, is there any statistics on how the authorities react to what's happening? Yes, it's not only about the prosecutor's office. We know that when there was that blockade from the Ukrainian side of those self-proclaimed republics, and there were the doom and gloom predictions that they would economically collapse and so on and so forth. I know, for example, that these the transfer of goods across the borders needed to be, you know, blocked after the enterprises and factory like that factory were confiscated. So if these if that movement of goods is now blocked, is now stopped, why didn't it happen earlier? And the Ukrainian authorities, when we ask them, their representatives about that, they need to answer, to give us an answer with regard to when these confiscated properties will be vacated and could be transferred under the control of their previous owners, and when that Donbass area is returned to Ukraine. And our law firm is trying to make those people who resisted the Donbass and Lugansk authorities and then fled to Ukraine, they be proclaimed the parties that sustained damages. And my understanding is that in many cases the Ukrainian authorities do not start a formal prosecution because of the activists from those self-proclaimed republics, because they later on would have to negotiate with them and with regard to the decisions of the Ukrainian authorities who, for example, charged a number of business people who traded, continued, trading with those territories, and they were prosecuted for that, and some of them were even imprisoned. And so the Security Service of Ukraine and the Prosecutor's Office of Ukraine, they are doing these, they conduct these prosecutions. They probably, have the whole lists of people whom they indicted and prosecuted and indicted and imprisoned. But if in our case, when we have that Mr. Lagin, who was shown in the video, who was one of the organizers of the referendums at which the public agreed to secede from Ukraine. So to charge these people, the Ukrainian authorities just don't have, they say they do not have enough evidence. So we want to form a message addressed to the Ukrainian Prosecutor's Office, and we would like to say in that message that they need to put into public domain the information on the confiscation of factories. If they do not have this information, they need to collate that information and publish it. I think that as almost 4 years have elapsed during that time, it's high time to have this information published. We are doing, we are trying to do this information, publish this information regularly, and we send this information to the administration of the president, and we think that our government needs to know, to have the list, so to say, of the enterprises that with whom the commerce and is because they are located in Donbass and were confiscated, should discontinue. I'm frequently asked by the journalists about when do you think Donbass will be returned to Ukraine. In my view, it's a rhetoric question, because Ukraine does not have a vision, so to say, of how to do that. There is no ideology in Ukraine that would stimulate this process. And I remember that when a law was enacted, what was its exact name, on the uncontrolled areas, on the status of uncontrolled areas, or something like that. After that, we understood that, yes, the ministry was established for the territories that we call the occupied territories, and yes, and after the creation of that ministry, there were a number of governmental structures were established that are supposed to deal with these things. And after that, the Minsk negotiations started, and we are trying to follow those negotiations, hoping that the situation will be somehow resolved But the fact that there are no investigations, for us, this is the evidence that politically, the political developments are not known to us. We do not know them, and we do not understand them. We think that before we speak with the representatives of the self-proclaimed republics, Ukraine should take away their firearms. And it doesn't appear as if Ukraine is doing that. The changes that I consider positive that have taken place recently are that a number of NGOs appeared in Ukraine, those that we can say make a difference. It's not like it was in the last days of Mr. Yanukovych's government. We see the activists who work, the journalists who, who cover these developments, this situation in the Donbass, and we hope that there will be a mass of people who want to build the nation and open the country, that they make the country open despite the opposition. So what we need to do is to open, to make the information open and public. And today it's difficult for me to formulate it, but I hope that everything that we consider evil is going to be punished, and we need to publish that information about that in the media. Thank you. Any questions from the audience? Thank you very much for your narrative. I represent a public organization. Some details I would like to clarify. You said that five entities have been recognized as those sustained who sustained damages as a result of the events of 2014. What I said was that we, as a law firm, represent five officially recognized parties that sustain damages, but these are our clients of our law firm. And fund, Isolation Fund is, or foundation, is one of them. And we spent, if I'm not mistaken, about 4 months, it took us 4 months to have them recognized as a party that sustained damages. And as you know, scores, maybe thousands of businesses, various companies, factories, and so on, they went bankrupt. And what these events in Donbass or whether these events in Donbass were recognized as damaging to these businesses. To how many of them, I'm not aware. I am aware of the 5 entities whom we represent, who are our clients. So is my understanding correct that another step should be made? Well, let us just say that in our view, as a law firm, we recognize that there were certain felonies committed against some parties who need to be proclaimed or identified as those sustaining damages, sustained damages. And then what we do, we gather information, and we did that, and we conveyed that information to the prosecutor's office, and the prosecutor's office replies to us that, gives us a reply that they do not have sufficient evidence to establish the exact, charges. My question is, how can you at all, charge someone who is not in the territory of this country? Well, according to the Criminal Code of Ukraine, with all the amendments that were recently introduced, there is a procedure of sending, the notifications about suspicions, even to the people who are out of Ukraine. But these, these steps, they are not, for some reasons, taken by the prosecutors. It could be done approximately as it is done against the Ukrainian citizens, of whom a lot of cases, or a number of cases, you've seen probably on TV when the charges, the suspicions and charges are proclaimed. As I can see, there are here a number of human rights or NGOs, and to you, I can say that, again, emphasize that we are just are not aware of what's going on, so to say, in the shadow, under the table, so to say. What are the dealings that might occur with regard to the factories and other properties that now remain in the territories that went out of control of Ukrainian authorities. We are trying to compile the lists of various entities, like companies, for example, that were located in Donetsk and whose owners fled into Ukraine. We hear from time to time that in Minsk they mention sometimes at the negotiations those enterprises, but the information about the outcomes or developments during these negotiations are not being made public. We think that probably this issue of compensations is raised during those negotiations, but publicly we do not have any information about that. So in my view, our task is that the NGOs, the journalists should exert more in order to dissipate this fog and put this, super patriotic rhetoric more on the legal footing. Then we'll have our prospects for the next 10 or 15 years more clear, more understandable. thank you now, all the participants here and all our viewers. We hope that we managed to somehow initiate a discussion around this issue, especially as recently a law